Before that, people talk about gender. It's one of the many things that makes us individuals in the world. We each have our own unique web that includes our body, how we feel inside, and how we express ourselves. Gender is individual, and it is also something that connects us to the people around us. People experience gender in so many ways. Some grown-ups may worry that children are too young to talk about gender diversity, but this is a part of all of us. So let's get started. And there are pretty pictures, which I will be showing to the entire congregation. This is a story about you. The important thing to remember is that you are the one who knows you best. When babies are born, people ask, is it a boy or a girl? Babies can't talk, so grown-ups guess by looking at their bodies. This is the sex assigned to you at birth, male or female. Sometimes people get this confused with gender, but gender is much more than the body you were born with. As babies grow into kids, they start to know what they like and don't like. This is your personal expression, what you like, how you dress, how you act, whether you like riding horses or making forts, or maybe singing. There are so many ways to express yourself. What you like can change as you grow up, or even from day to day. What do you like? What do you guys like? Can you tell me at least one thing? Maybe it's swimming.
Gardening.
Gardening, yes, absolutely.
Poetry.
Poetry, wonderful. Anything else?
Dancing.
Dancing, awesome. What kind of clothes do folks like to wear?
Shorts.
Shorts, nice. In this heat, yeah, definitely. Wonderful. Kids know a lot about themselves. They know who they are by how they feel inside. This is your identity. Who you feel like inside, who you know yourself to be. This can also change as you grow up, or from day to day. Your gender is just one part of your identity, what makes you, you. Some people say there are only two genders, but there are really many genders. Some examples, girl, boy, both, neither, just me. You are who you say you are because you know you best. For some people, the grown-ups guessed right about their body and their gender. This is called cisgender, when someone's identity matches their sex assigned at birth. And for some people, there are more than just two choices. These are just a few words people use: trans, genderqueer, non-binary, gender fluid, transgender, agender, bigender, two-spirit, and there are even more words people are using. Actually, fun fact, in a recent survey of UU trans folk, there were over 90 different gender identities that people identified out of 300 people.
Wow.
I know, right? This is called the gender spectrum. There are lots of ways to be a boy, and there are lots of ways to be a girl. There are lots of ways to be a kid, or a grown-up for that matter. Be who you are. And if anyone, particularly our token child, but anyone else wants to come out after the service, there's a cool wheel at the back that you can play with and see sort of what your gender identity might look like. So, Shall we sing the children out? Are we singing the children out since there is one child today? Would you like to be sung out? No, you're good? Cool. Then we will go to our offering, which Sue Ann will introduce. Actually, that hymn was actually written for one of the first youth conferences for our denomination, back when it was LRY, Liberal Religious Youth. Our reading today comes from Hava Rosenfarb, who was a survivor of the Auschwitz ghetto. She is a Yiddish author who lived the rest of her life out in Montreal with her children, and by all accounts had a very joyful life after her time. This poem is called Address for My Child. I would sew a dress for you, my child, out of tulle made of spring's joyful green, and gladly crown your head with a diadem made of the sunniest smiles ever seen. I would fit out your feet with a pair of crystal-like, weightless, dance-ready shoes, and let you step out of the house with bouquets, bright with the promise of pinks and of blues. But outside, it is cold and dreary, my child, the wanton winds lurking, unbridled and wild. They will mangle the dress of joy into shreds and sweep the sun's smiling crown off your head. Grind into dust the translucent glass of your shoes and bury in mud the dreams of pinks and of blues. From far away I can hear you call me and moan, "Mother, mother, why did you leave me alone?" So perhaps I should tailor a robe for you, my child, out of the cloak of my old-fashioned pain, and alter my hat of experience for you to shelter you from the ravaging rain. I would shoe your feet with my own heavy boots, the soles studded with spikes from my saviorless past, and guide your way through the door with a rushlight of wisdom I've saved till this hour of dusk. But outside it is cold and dreary, my child, the wanton winds lurking, unbridled and wild. We'll rip up this robe sewn with outdated thread, bare your chest to all danger, to fear bare your head. The heavy boots will sink in the swamp and will drown, the light of wisdom mocked by the laugh of a clown. From afar I hear you call me and moan, "Mother, mother, why did you leave me alone?" What a wretched seamstress your mother is, incapable of sewing a dress for her child. All she does is prick her clumsy fingers, cross-stitching her soul while her eyes go blind. The only thing that I can sew for you, my sweet, my golden child, is a cotton shift of the love I store in my heart. The only thing I can give to light your way are my tears of blessing. I have nothing more. So I must leave you outside, my child, and leave you there alone. Perhaps dressed in clothing of love, you will learn better how to go from home. So I sit here and sew, while in my heart I hope and pray. My hands unsteady tremble, my mind distracted, gone astray. I invite you all to take a deep breath. "50 years ago, Stonewall happened. The first Pride, a group of gay and trans women and bisexual and people of many genders and many sexualities, many of them sex workers, many of them just there for a night of shared community. We're in a bar in New York City, and we're involved in what was later called a riot. where these heroes of many genders, these beautiful, bold trans women of color, glittering with high heels on and a brick in at least one of their hands, headed out of the bar and went against a cold and dreary world, against a wild and unbridled wind. Yesterday, I got to participate in the first Pride in Watertown, South Dakota. They were expecting protesters, but we actually had no protesters, which was super cool. And that experience of Pride yesterday still had that same sense of community, that same sense of a safe space for people of all genders and all sexualities. But it didn't have to be a riot. There didn't need to be any bricks. I'd like to talk to you about some things about our community in Unitarian Universalism today. I was actually at GA this past week, and I had the delight of being in a majoritively trans space for the first time, in a room with folks who identified of all different gender identities. And let me tell you, it was pretty cool. It was an experience that I will treasure for the rest of my life as a genderqueer person myself. It was amazing to get to be in a space where my identity was both honored and loved. And have that space be you. Have that space be my religious community, which is something that so many people don't get in their religious communities, and is truly special. What was really interesting was they were handing out buttons in the queer space, and one of them said, "Ask me my pronoun." And I put it on, and I left the workshop on trans inclusion, and I walked out into the general hallway and sat down at a table, and two older folks, a man and a woman, sat down next to me, and the woman said, "Whoa!" and pointed at my button, and as if I was like, very strange for having said button. And I was jarred for a moment. I was coming from this very inclusive, exciting space for me, something I'd never experienced before in our community. And then I walk out the doors and sit down, and I was like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And so we sat there in kind of awkward silence for about 90 seconds. And then the man, who had not spoken yet, very quietly and sort of looking to the side, asked me, "So what is cisgender?" And in that moment, I was delighted. I was delighted because these two people who were clearly a little put off by the fact that I had an Ask Me My Pronouns button were feeling the need and the urge and the excitement to, just a little bit of my excitement, to ask me questions, to ask me a question that they might not have asked otherwise. And we ended up having a really good conversation, and then they told me about their congregation, and it ended up being a congregation that was in New York City, which is where I'm moving to, and so we got to chat about that. But I don't think we would have had a conversation at all. I think we would have sat in awkward silence until one of us left if that man, that older man, had not asked that question that he was clearly uncomfortable with. He was probably worried that I would take it the wrong way or make fun of him for having to ask that question. But because we were all open to a new thing, something magical happened. We got to have that safe, inclusive, loving experience that I had just experienced in the queer space, but in a space where folks that didn't know the answers to whatever questions they were asking got to have a dialogue. And there are so many questions that we don't have answers for. It's so lovely when there's an actual answer to a question. This warmth, this sweetness of a loving community is what I think Chava Rosenfarb is talking about when she talks about a shift of love that she makes for her daughter. She doesn't know what the world outside will bring. Her life certainly showed her the depths of what humanity can go to, the darkest places in the human spirit. And yet, she believed that if she clad her child in love, if she gave her child as much as she had of that thing, her blessing, her tears of blessing, that would be enough, and her child would find her way home. There's another story I would like to tell you. It's fair warning, it is a biblical story, but it's from the Jewish tradition, from my tradition. It's the story of Esther. I don't know if any of you know of the Jewish holiday of Purim, but it is quite a party. It rivals Pride. And people come and they laugh and they sometimes dress up in costumes, and they tell the story of Esther, who was a Jewish young woman long time ago in a country where Jewishness was a minority, an oppressed group, a group of people where if people found out you were Jewish, bad things might happen to you. And she was one of the most beautiful women in all of the land. And the king of that land, who was kind of a shallow guy in this story, he wasn't looking for the nobility of spirit that perhaps we might look for today in our partners. He was shocked by her beauty, and he didn't know who she was, and he proposed to her on the spot. He said, "You must be my wife," and he was the king, so she was like, "Okay, dude, we can do that." And her uncle Mordecai, he cautioned her. He said, "Don't tell the king that you're Jewish. Marry this king and be his wife and grow in relationship with him. Get to know him. Let him get to know you. And then, maybe, in a time of need for the Jewish people, you'll be there. You'll be there loved in the system, in this marriage with a man who has the power to save our people in this place." And so she did that. She hid her identity. And that must have been hard for her because, especially as a Jewish woman in that time, there were a lot of rituals that you would do, a lot of practices that would bring you joy, that would bring you hope and love. It must have been hard to leave her community where she was celebrated for who she was, where she found that sweetness, that warmth, and go into a place where people didn't even know who she was. They just knew she was beautiful. But she did it. She went and she married the king, and they did in fact build a relationship. The king fell in love with her, hopefully, eventually, for her nobility of spirit. And they had the kind of relationship where when something bad happened to her people, she could say, "I'm Jewish. Please help my people." And the king said, "Oh my God, okay, I did not realize that was your identity, and now I feel a little uncomfortable, but I love you. And so, of course, I will help you to save your people." I think this is what our Instagram poet Mayra for our chalice lighting is talking about. I'm going to read it one more time. "I don't care what they say. I love you. You were made for me, and I was made for you. Our love is not a sin. Their judgment is." We don't always have to know the right way to talk to one another. It doesn't always have to be comfortable. It doesn't always have to be immediately celebratory, immediately joyful. When I sat down at that table at GA, it was pretty uncomfortable for a good 2 minutes. while I shoveled food into my mouth trying to get out of this situation. And the other two people at the table sort of awkwardly avoided my gaze whenever I looked up. But because that man was willing to put himself out there just a little bit, to recognize that we're both part of the same community, that even if we don't know each other, I love you. That's enough. That's enough to overcome any awkwardness, any uncomfortability. If we are gentle with one another, if we are sweet with one another, if we give each other a chance to be ourselves, then that cannot be a sin. That cannot be wrong. Only the judgment where someone says, I don't know you. I don't know what's going on with you, and I don't want to know. That's what the sin is. That's what the wrong is in our community, is when, without even giving the person in front of you a chance, you say, I don't know, I'm just going to go over there and avoid this. I'm going to let the awkwardness linger. I'm going to forget for a moment that I love you. That's what Unitarian Universalism gives us, is a space where I haven't met any of the people in this room before today, but I know that I love you because you're Unitarian Universalists. You're people who committed, who continue to commit to love, and that is enough for me. Thank you.